My wife doesn't love me, and she definitely doesn't love our kid. The day our son was born, she didn't even look at him and just handed him to me. Later, her true love came back to the country. The usually cold woman got drunk at home for the first time and held our baby with a smile. Surprised, my son wrapped his arms around her neck and quietly asked me, "Dad, what's wrong with Auntie?" I squatted down, pulled him into my arms, and explained with tears in my eyes, "Auntie's special someone has returned. We shouldn't bother her anymore, so we have to move out." After putting my son to sleep, I went back to the guest room to draft a divorce agreement. This year marks the 7th year of my marriage to Betty. Also, the 7th year we've been living apart. Now I'm finally ready to let her go. Knock knock. The door opened, and my 7-year-old son, holding a toy plane, found me. "Dad, are we really moving?" He looked at me, a longing in his eyes. "But Auntie held me tonight. Does that mean she's finally beginning to like me?" I paused for a moment, feeling a bit lost. 7 years of marriage, and Betty never let him call her mom. When he was 2, she walked back with him from the supermarket after he accidentally called her mom. By the time they got home, he'd fallen so many times. His knees and palms were scraped raw. At 4, it took weeks of pleading before Betty agreed to take him to an amusement park. Again, he accidentally called her mom, and she let go of his hand, letting him get lost in the crowd. When we found him, he was curled up in a bush, crying so hard he almost passed out. After that, he learned to call her Auntie, and our family became a joke. Thinking about this made my nose sting, and I couldn't help but hug my son tight. "Jack, Auntie's special someone is back. We can't stay here anymore." My son's expression dimmed, then he eagerly held up the toy airplane to me. "But Dad, Auntie gave me this gift tonight. If she doesn't like me, why would she give me a gift?" His face was full of hope, desperate to prove he was loved by his mother. I opened my mouth but couldn't say anything. How do I tell him? Do I say Betty is happy because her love returned? Or that this gift isn't really meant for him? I couldn't speak. I swallowed the lump in my throat, and like before, protected my son with a sugar-coated truth. I kissed his forehead and wiped away the tears he couldn't see. As a father, no matter how much it hurt, I wanted to protect this illusion. I endured the pain and forced a smile. "Jack, if Dad wants to take you away from Auntie, would you come with me?" He stiffened a bit and then quietly said, "Can we not go? I haven't properly called her mom yet." I clenched my lips tightly. "Jack, Auntie doesn't want us in her home. Dad will take you away, all right?" He pulled back, holding the plane model close for a long time before speaking. "I want to give Auntie 3 more chances. If she really doesn't like us, we'll leave her forever." Closing my eyes, I agreed to his request. "Okay, Betty, my son, and I will give you 3 more chances. After that, there's no place for you in this family." Today is Friday. It's also the day Betty's special someone returned to the country. They were college sweethearts and got engaged after graduation. But a month before the wedding, Nick fell for a French woman. He left Betty without a second glance to chase true love in France. After that, they went their separate ways. Betty was down about it for quite some time. That's when I became her assistant. One drunken night, we had a child together. I became her secret husband, and she couldn't bring herself to accept my child either. I printed the divorce agreement from last night and started drafting my resignation letter. Unlike my son, I'm used to Betty's coldness. I'm not foolish enough to wait for her to change. 7 years were enough to crush all my hope. "Henry, are you really resigning?" A coworker spotted my screen and asked quietly. I smiled and replied with an excuse I'd prepared. "Yeah, the kid's mom is overseas. I figured we'd join them, make it a family reunion." He nodded. "A wise decision. It's tough raising a kid by yourself back home. You know, we all thought you were a single dad." I had to chuckle bitterly. I wasn't a single dad, but I was worse off than one. My eyes stung, but I smiled anyway, keeping other people in the dark. After submitting my resignation, Betty walked in with Nick. He led the way, smiling warmly. Following him, Betty's gaze never left him. A colleague nudged me. "Henry, see that? Betty's finally opened up." I forced a smile while my heart poured rain. It only takes 10 years for a tree to bloom. But Betty, even if I waited a lifetime, she wouldn't look my way. As they were passing by, I couldn't help but call out to her. Before I could say anything, she shot me a frosty glare. "Henry, what is it?" There was a cold warning in her voice, telling me to swallow my words, reminding me of my place. I lowered my eyes, hiding the tears in them one last time. "Sorry, Betty." Betty acknowledged me with a sound before turning back to focus on Nick, her whole world. She was my wife, the mother of my child. Yet here she stood, openly loving another man. It was both ironic and sobering. I chuckled to myself. Originally, I was going to tell her I was leaving. Now I guess there's no point in talking about it. She never cared anyway. Didn't care about my feelings, didn't care about our kid. And definitely didn't care about this sham of a marriage. Back at my desk, I got a call from my son on his kid's watch. "Dad, there's a parent-teacher meeting tonight. We get out early today. Aunt Wendy is dropping me off to see you." I froze for a second, instinctively getting up to leave. Then I saw Betty fixing Nick's hair. Not far away, my son stood with his backpack. A little guy at the elevator, staring blankly as his mom got all cozy with some stranger. With that kind of tenderness, that kind of patience. My son and I have seen this before. Just as I was about to take him away, Betty noticed our son. She tensed up and pulled her hand back instinctively. But then, she walked past him with that guy, slowly but surely, like she didn't even know him. A pang hit me in the chest, and I hurriedly took my son back to my desk. Before I could explain, my son's eyes reddened, and he asked, "Dad, is that the guy Auntie likes?" In that moment, I couldn't find any words, only nodded with tears in my eyes. My son didn't ask anything else, just quietly took out his homework. But he couldn't stop his tears from soaking the paper. I hugged my son, my whole world. "Betty, you've got 2 more chances before we leave." After packing up, my son and I were ready to go home. On the way, he asked, "Dad, can Auntie come to the meeting tonight?" In 7 years of marriage, Betty had never been to my son's parent-teacher meetings. Seeing the hope in his eyes, I couldn't say no, so I sent Betty a message. "Our son has a meeting tonight. Do you have time?" The message went out, and just like before, it felt like it sank into the ocean. My son looked down, hugging his backpack, and asked, "She doesn't want to come, does she?" Then he smiled knowingly, pretending it didn't matter. "It's okay. Auntie's busy, I understand." Hearing my son's mature words, I felt like a massive stone was crushing my chest. It hurt so much I could hardly breathe. Just as I was about to say something, my phone pinged. It was a message from Betty. "I have time, I'll come." Joy overwhelmed me, and I couldn't wait to show my son the message. "Jack, did you see? Mom said she's coming." He froze for a moment, then quickly broke into a big smile. After 7 years, Betty was finally willing to attend our son's meeting. With Betty's assurance, my son was excited the whole way. He chatted about how many times the teacher praised him, how many high scores he got, and how many awards he won this semester. He also told me that he got elected as the class monitor, and the teacher would announce it at the meeting tonight. Then my son asked, "Dad, will Mom like me more because I'm doing so well in school?" I froze for a bit, then just felt a deeper ache, silently hoping Betty wouldn't break her promise. Before we leave, I hope my son's wish comes true, even if it's just us fooling ourselves. The clock on the wall ticked on, and the meeting time got closer and closer. Betty still hadn't shown up, but Nick's social media updated. In the picture, Betty sat beside an unfamiliar little boy, teaching him to build Legos. Caption, "Future Great Mom." I turned my head, looking into the living room. My 7-year-old son quietly playing with Legos on the couch. Same Legos, same age, same need for companionship. But Betty never was there for him. Sensing my gaze, my son's look was cautious as he asked, "Dad, is Mom busy again?" I stared into my son's eyes, unable to tell him. His mom wasn't busy. She was with other kids. I couldn't say anything. I just hugged him like I had many times before, reassuring him, "It's okay, you've got Dad." Dad will always be here with you. My son, understanding as ever, didn't ask further, though his eyes turned red. On the way to school, neither of us mentioned Betty. It was as if she never promised anything, as if there were only the two of us all along. Betty, you've got one last chance. After parking, I walked with my son into the school. But when we stepped into the classroom, I froze. Betty? Mom? Betty sat by the window. Hearing us, she turned with surprise in her eyes. What are you doing here? Her surprise made me pause, a bad feeling rising in me. It's been 6 months since my son started school, and Betty didn't even know his class's name. My son didn't hear, cheerfully running towards her. Mom, you... Betty frowned. What did you call me? His face froze, then naturally changed the term. Auntie, you're sitting in the wrong spot. My seat's up front. He looked at Betty, eyes full of joy. It's Betty's first time at a meeting for our son. Her first time keeping a promise. But that excitement didn't last long. Betty avoided his eyes. I'm not sitting wrong. This is my spot. My son froze, ready to speak, but got pushed aside. Move. That's my mom. Instinctively, I pulled my son to me. Betty stood up as well, but stopped when she saw Nick's shocked look. She stepped back, pulling the boy behind her, awkwardly said, Mike didn't mean it, I apologize for him. My son and I were stunned. Such protection, such care, our son never had it. Who is he? I asked softly. Betty froze, glanced at me, and a bit of guilt flashed in her eyes. Just a friend's kid. Really? I murmured, already knowing inside. This was the boy from Nick's photo, the one Betty was willing to spend time with. Sure enough, Nick walked in with a bottle of water the next second. He was surprised to see us and said, Henry, are you here for the parent-teacher conference? Where's the kid's mom? I glanced at Betty instinctively, but she avoided my gaze. I knew she was afraid I'd reveal her secret. My mind drifted back to the day Nick returned to the country. Betty, usually so composed, got insanely drunk that day. It was the first time she ever smiled when her son called her mom. My son and I thought our happiness was finally here. But in the next moment, Betty whispered Nick's name. That's when I understood she had mistaken us. I held my son's hand tighter, just as I was about to speak, but my son beat me to it. My mom isn't in the country. She's very busy. I don't want to disturb her. His words shocked both of us. I couldn't believe it and looked down. All I saw were my son's slightly teary eyes. He looked at Betty, forcing a mature smile. Then he said, Aunt Betty, Dad and I are going to go now. At that moment, all the sadness filled my chest. As I turned away, Betty grabbed my arm. What did Jack just say? She was shocked, looking at our son, as if confirming something. Was it because the kid who used to cling to her had now learned to keep his distance? I managed a sarcastic smile. Nothing, the parent-teacher conference is about to start. I shook off her hand and led my son to seats at the front. As we sat down, I could feel the intense gaze at my back. But no matter how heated it was, it couldn't warm the heart. The parent-teacher conference began as planned. Holding my son, I hoped the teacher would speak sternly to drown out the warm exchange behind us. The teacher mentioned my son, announcing he was this semester's class president and asked him to come up and speak. But my son refused. He didn't want to face Betty sitting with that kid. He couldn't accept that his mom would rather be at a school meeting for someone else's child and not let him call her mom openly. When it ended, I took my son to the teacher's office to withdraw him from school. When we walked out of the gate, we bumped into Betty waiting for someone. She stood by the road, looking like she'd been there a while, holding a stick of cotton candy. Why are you out so late? Let's head home together, said Betty, extending the cotton candy to my son. Going home together. Once my son and I longed for this. Now it just felt like an insult. My son reached out and took the cotton candy, finally smiling after a gloomy evening. Seeing his hopeful eyes, I softened inside and was about to agree when she said, Nick's kid is a transfer student and didn't participate in the class competition. Maybe you could suggest to the teacher that he not be class president and give Mike a chance. That casual remark turned our hearts cold. Sure enough, all gifts come with hidden costs. just like this cotton candy. Okay? Aunt Betty. It was my son's voice. He stuffed the cotton candy in his mouth, eyes still red. Betty's eyes softened as she was about to take his hand, but then her phone rang. It was Nick. Betty, Mike's not feeling well. Can you come see us now? Betty's face changed, and she immediately got into the car. As she closed the car door, my son suddenly called out, "Mom!" Betty froze, looking at her son's teary eyes. After a long pause, she said, "Be safe." This time, she didn't correct him, but that was the last time he called her mom. That night, my son and I packed up and booked flights for overseas. We didn't mention Betty again. The living room lights wouldn't stay on, waiting for her through the night. The next morning, my son and I left with our luggage, checked our tickets, and boarded the plane. Before turning off my phone, I sent Betty one last message. "I wish you happiness." The conversation thread suddenly buzzed with activity. My finger hovered over the power button, unable to press down. Jack noticed my hesitation, glanced at the screen, and his eyes reddened instantly. He tugged at my sleeve, quietly reminding me, "Dad, we're supposed to go." I affectionately ruffled his hair, feeling a pang for my child who had grown up too soon. At the office, Betty stared at the shut-off notification on the screen, her frown deepening. Yesterday, she rushed over, only to find Mike was simply hungry and whining for KFC. Thoughts of Jack she'd left behind created a slight sting of guilt. Mike had been thrilled with that meal. Today, she thought if she took Jack to KFC, he'd probably be happy too. "Betty." Nick's voice broke her thoughts. She looked at Nick in his light V-neck black shirt and frowned slightly. Henry, who had a great build, never dressed like this, always covering himself meticulously. Nick, sensing Betty's dazed expression, thought it was his charm. Moving closer, he said, "The clients are here and the shareholders too. Let me go with you this time." The strong rose scent from him made Betty sneeze a few times. I knew Betty was allergic to perfumes and gave away all mine for her, even swapping out shampoo for a mild tea scent. Yet Nick, her former fiancé for years, had forgotten. Betty silently distanced herself from him, then stood up and walked toward the conference room. Last time, she agreed to let Nick return to work, and this was the perfect opportunity to introduce him formally to everyone. She also wanted to let people know that Nick has her backing. Seeing Betty's nod, Nick followed her in his leather shoes. Inside the conference room, everyone was enthusiastically discussing the male model secretary they saw in the CEO's office, but fell silent when Betty entered. Betty was oblivious, opened the files on the table, and frowned after a quick glance. Everyone exchanged looks. Their expressions varied. Every file had scribbles done with watercolor markers, with the word "approve" scribbled in childish handwriting. Betty tossed the file back on the table, her tone icy. "Who prepared this file? Don't you even have basic work skills?" The department heads exchanged glances in silence. All these files were forwarded to the CEO's office by them and printed by the secretary. Even if there were issues, it wasn't their fault. Betty scanned the room with a frosty look before coldly commanding, "Get Henry here." The HR director, feeling awkward, began to speak. "Betty, Henry." Before he could finish, the client interrupted, slamming the file on the table. "Betty, if this is your company's attitude, we have no reason to cooperate." Everyone looked at the file. The client leader's name was defaced with a crooked turtle drawing and some insulting words beside it. Betty's face went pale. She never imagined that the man she trusted would mess things up so badly. Nick, teary-eyed, explained with a hint of grievance. "I'm sorry, I didn't expect this." The client wasn't nice about it, snapping back, "And who are you?" "I'm talking to Betty." Betty rubbed her aching temples, stood up, and apologized. "I'm sorry. This oversight is my fault. I'll immediately get new contracts prepared. To show our apology, we're willing to cut the price by an additional 3%. The client said nothing, calculating the worth of their face. Nick's upset look made everyone frown, losing all semblance of friendliness. In business, looks might be a plus, but these sharp folks value work skills above all. Like Henry before, he not only looked pleasing but his work skills were miles ahead of Nick. They couldn't understand why Betty would prefer this nice-looking but useless person over Henry. After everyone left, Nick, eyes still teary, looked at her. "Betty, I'm sorry. I didn't think this would happen. What should I do?" Betty instinctively wanted to comfort him but froze when she saw his pitiful eyes. Henry never looked at her like that. He was proud and always striving for perfection at work. No matter how hard or tricky a situation was, he handled it with ease, unlike Nick, who just pushed the mess onto her. If it had been Henry today, no, it wouldn't be. He was meticulous, and Jack was well-behaved. Never. Thinking of this, Betty's pained gaze slowly cooled as she looked at Nick again. Now calm. You should leave for now. Don't get involved in the rest. Nick hesitated, surprised at Betty's distant attitude. Betty, out. Betty's tone turned cold as she lost patience. Nick bit his lip and reluctantly walked out. Betty slumped powerlessly into her chair, her head filled with memories. 7 years ago, I stood out among many outstanding job seekers, hand-picked by Betty to be her assistant. Back then, I was just a rookie without status or a great background, not even good-looking. I could barely grasp the most basic contract terms. Many speculated I was just a man living off Betty. I worked desperately to stand by her side legitimately. At work, I'd ask veterans for advice despite their disdain, always carrying a notebook to jot down all her preferences. After hours, I'd teach myself French, German, even Esperanto, striving to be her reliable support. At business events, I could instantly list everyone's favorites, skillfully helping her deal with tough clients. Whenever she needed me, I'd appear by her side. Gradually, I became indispensable to her personally and professionally. Everyone envied Betty for having such a top-notch secretary like Henry, and she was pleased to have such a capable assistant. Sadly, everything was ruined that night. From the gold standard secretary in her heart, I became a schemer supposedly trying to seduce her. All my efforts seemed, in her eyes, just ways to get closer. She once admired me deeply but now holds me in equal disdain, to the point that even our child doesn't get a shred of care. In her mind, if Nick was the one with her, life wouldn't be like this. Now, she's got what she wanted, but thinking about today's incident makes her feel regretful. Seeing today's flashy Nick, nothing like the love she lost. Maybe her feelings changed long ago. Maybe she doesn't love Nick that much anymore. Maybe she loves it. Betty rubbed her temples, trying to get rid of that crazy thought. But she couldn't help thinking about Jack's face. She might not love me, but the kid is innocent. With that in mind, Betty took out her phone and quickly typed a message. "Pack up, I'll pick you up later." Sensing the harshness of her tone, she adjusted it. "Let's take Jack to KFC tonight." Betty read it over twice and finally took a deep breath before hitting send. The whole afternoon, the message felt like it sank into the ocean. No reply came. Betty picked up her phone again and again, only to put it down disappointed every time. Nick came over with coffee, placed it on the table and softly said, "Betty." Betty stared at the blank screen, not even glancing at him. With a tone of frustration she didn't even realize. "Just leave it and go. And in the future, call me boss at the office. Even if I got you in here, we need to avoid suspicion." Nick looked so pitiful. Betty looked up, frowning slightly, and called the secretary on the intercom. "Nick's not quite fitting in yet. Have him rotate through the departments. He can come back after the evaluation period." When Nick was led away, still looking pitiful, Betty wasn't moved in the slightest. As it got closer to quitting time and she still hadn't gotten a reply, she found herself surprisingly patient. She thought of all the times she'd go out with her only to be left halfway. This time, she actually went to KFC and stood in line for half an hour to pack up a meal. As long as Jack eats, she'll remember what she likes. When she enthusiastically opened the door to their home, the large living room was empty. No Jack on the carpet playing with blocks. No me in the kitchen making dinner. Betty went to the kitchen. She grabbed a can of Coke from the fridge and noticed the door was covered in little drawings she hadn't seen before. Mostly family portraits. A sharp pang hit Betty's heart, because in Jack's drawings, there was no mom. She suddenly remembered the first time Jack had asked to draw her. He'd approached her cautiously with his sketchpad, saying, "Mom, can you be my model?" And how did she respond then? She'd kept her face blank, not even tearing her eyes from Mike's text messages, replying dismissively, "I'm busy, no time." Thinking of this made Betty feel a wave of restlessness and regret. It's okay, next time Jack asks, she'll say yes. Betty laid out the food on the table, then glanced at her phone. It was 10 minutes past time for Jack's daycare to let out. By the usual route, he and I should be home in about 5 minutes. She nervously arranged the fries and carefully squirted ketchup into a heart shape on a white plate. After getting everything ready, she sat at the table, anxiously watching the door. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes went by. The door and the phone stayed silent, making Betty's heart feel like it was being pulled apart by an invisible hand, leaving her tense and uneasy. Finally, after half an hour, there was a gentle knock at the door. Betty happily went to the door. "Jack, guess what I got for you today?" She didn't even get the words "surprise" out before her smile froze on her face. "What are you doing here?" There at the door, Nick stood awkwardly with Mike. Noticing Betty's unfriendly tone, he said awkwardly, "Mike knows he messed up big time and insisted on coming to apologize to you himself. I also have some work matters I wanted to discuss with Henry. After all, he used to." Betty looked at the father and son, clearly feeling wronged, yet she didn't want to face the scrutinizing eyes of the neighbors. She slightly stepped aside and let them in. Mike quickly spotted the KFC on the table and was about to reach for it, but was stopped by Nick's stern gaze. He lowered his head and said, feeling aggrieved, "Mom, I was wrong. I shouldn't have scribbled on your papers." Seeing Mike's pitiful face, Betty softened a bit. Jack often looked at her with those same eyes. Thinking of her son made her uneasy again. It's been so long. Why aren't Henry and Jack home yet? She ignored the two of them, picked up her phone, and walked into the kitchen to call my number, but it was still off. She pressed her lips together and hesitated for a moment, then dialed the office number to ask about my absence from work today. But then she heard a loud noise from the living room. When Betty came out, she saw Mike standing on the base of a partially destroyed Lego set. Tiny bricks scattered all over, leaving the living room in chaos. Nick's stern voice frightened Mike into dropping the half-eaten tart on the floor, and he scurried, crying to Betty. In the past, whenever he got into trouble and his dad wanted to scold him, Betty would protect him like his mom. He thought this time would be the same. Nick, seeing the boys move, didn't stop him. Instead, a trace of satisfaction flickered in his eyes. But this time they were both wrong. Betty pulled out her phone, snapped a few photos, and sent them to her lawyer. Her voice was icy as she delivered an ultimatum. "The damage and compensation from today will be discussed with my lawyer. Now please leave my home." Nick, feeling both wronged and incredulous, responded, "Betty, it's just a toy. How about Mike apologizes to Jack?" Gazing at the shattered pieces, Betty's voice was soft but made Nick shiver. This was Jack's championship prize from the Lego competition, the only one in the world. "Do you think an apology will fix this?" Nick was speechless. Mike, however, was defiant. "I won't apologize. Why should I apologize to some mistress's kid?" Betty's eyes widened in shock. "What did you say?" Nick tried to cover Mike's mouth, but it was too late. Mike stood defiantly, hands on his hips. "Jack's dad is a lover, and Jack is the lover's kid. If he hadn't shamelessly seduced you, you were supposed to be my mom." Betty's voice turned icy. "Who told you that?" Mike shrank a little, glanced at Nick, but still shouted loudly. "After the last parent-teacher meeting, that's what kids at the kindergarten said. Only a lover's child is not recognized. His house, his mom, they should have been mine with Dad." Betty's face darkened as she recalled how she'd sternly stopped Jack from calling her mom during the meeting. Her behavior might have seriously hurt her son, something she hadn't considered before. Hearing it from other kids must have been devastating. No wonder Jack's face looked so disappointed. She felt a surge of regret. Betty, eyes red with anger, dragged Mike by the collar and tossed him out the door. Nick hurried over and helped Mike to his feet, accusing her. Betty, take your anger out on me. The kid's innocent. Betty heard Nick's pleas echo in her mind. Betty, misunderstand me all you want, but the kid is innocent. Show her some motherly love, please. She thought of that proud man. He never caved to her misunderstandings or coldness, except when it came to the kid. Betty angrily called security to remove them and then started frantically calling her office. By the time she reached the HR director, she was about to lose it. Hello. The line was noisy, and she heard the HR director soothing a child. Mommy has work to do, but I'll play Lego with you soon. All right? A child's soft voice came from the phone. Then hurry, or the big monster will take your room. The HR director laughed and replied, then moved to a quiet spot. Betty? What's up? The deep voice snapped Betty out of her thoughts. She awkwardly cleared her throat. What's the reason Henry is absent today? The HR director paused before responding. Henry resigned. What? Betty exclaimed, clenching her fists. The HR director hurriedly explained. Henry submitted his resignation the day before yesterday. He said his wife is working overseas, and he wants to reunite with his family and not come back. Betty gritted her teeth and asked, how come no one told me about this? The HR director hesitated a moment. Betty, you mentioned Henry was just a regular assistant, so his exit procedures followed standard company protocol and didn't need your senior approval. Seeing Henry's determination, I processed his resignation. Is there a problem? Betty listened, gripping her hand tighter, almost laughing in exasperation. How did she not know when Henry got a wife abroad? About to vent her anger, a child's voice suddenly came through the phone. Mommy, why aren't you here yet? The HR director's soothing voice followed. Soon. Be good for Mommy while she finishes the call. Okay? It seemed like every adult naturally spoke softer with a child. Betty listened in a daze, unavoidably thinking of Jack. She once had a complete family, didn't she? But it seemed like she lost it. She woodenly walked into the guest room, a place she hadn't stepped into in 7 years. Everything was as it was before except for the new divorce papers on the table. She flipped through the pages, the terms clearly outlining demands. The usually stoic woman's eyes suddenly welled up with tears. She hadn't expected the man she thought was greedy to only want Jack, not this home or her. Betty didn't go to work. She waited by the kindergarten early in the morning. She was waiting to see me drop Jack off with a smile. Unfortunately, she waited all day without seeing either of us. Pickup time, Mike ran out and immediately spotted Betty's Rolls-Royce. Just as he was about to approach the car like he always did, Betty pulled him back. Where's Jack? Did you see him today? Mike looked at Betty with disdain. No. Maybe he knows he's just a lover's kid and didn't dare to come to school. Nick arrived to see the standoff, feeling more uneasy. Yesterday, as soon as he got home, he received 2 pieces of mail, a termination notice and a letter from a lawyer. He thought he'd already won Betty back, but it turns out her heart was already taken, by me and Jack. She just didn't want to admit it. When the principal found out who she was, his attitude shifted from surprise to disdainful. He didn't hold back his words. In all my years, I've never seen someone so eager to be another kid's mom. Every parent-teacher meeting, other kids would tease Jack about not having a mom. I really thought his mom had passed. Jack's dad had already completed the withdrawal paperwork for him. Apart from a stack of certificates, there was no trace of him left. Betty stood outside the kindergarten with the thick pile of certificates, tears streaming down her face. She finally realized she hadn't just lost a supportive husband, but also a remarkable son. The next time I saw Betty was at Jack's art exhibition. Over the past few years abroad, I had nurtured Jack's interest in art. Despite his young age, he'd already made a name for himself as a budding artist. He was invited to bring his work back home for a charity auction, with all the proceeds going to a shelter, as he wished. At the start of the auction, someone bid high on all of Jack's paintings. I had a hunch about who it might be. Sure enough, when the artist was thanking the buyer, Betty appeared. She looked much more worn than before, her clothes wrinkled, and new lines marked her eyes. Even so, she still had a certain beauty. She stared steadily at us as she awkwardly accepted the flowers Jack handed her. During the hugging segment, I overheard her whisper, "I'm sorry, Jack. I lost you. Can you give Mom another chance, please?" Jack stiffened for a moment, then quickly stepped back, smiling politely. "Thank you, ma'am, for your donation. I hope you continue to support charity and help more kids find their mothers." Betty's eyes welled up again as she looked at Jack. But what good is love that comes too late? Betty's hurt will be a lifelong scar on Jack's heart. Even if he can forgive, I won't find it as easy. After the charity sale, Betty followed us to our home abroad. When the doorbell rang, I wasn't surprised to see her there with a guilty, nervous look in her eyes. She stood at the door and looked at me earnestly. "I never agreed to the divorce. I know I've been wrong, and I've reflected on it many times over these years. I want my family back. Will you give me a chance to court you properly?" I rarely stayed silent, but this time, after a pause, I let her in. I knew that sometimes Jack still cried for his mom, though he had grown and learned to hide his feelings. He was afraid of making me sad, so he never mentioned her. A month later, Betty knocked on my door again. "I've transferred my business abroad. I'm going to do my best to be a good mom from now on." Jack and I exchanged a knowing smile. "I believe she will,"